Yeah. Yeah.
And there we are.
We're live. Again.
Excellent. Do you have a link?
Ready
Are we
when you
getting
are.
echoes again?
No, I don't hear any.
I was getting one or
I
two.
don't hear any.
We might be okay now.
Yeah, I don't hear any echoes. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we good? Okay, perfect.
Yay!
All right, so this is the Fantasy Authors Unite character development chat. And shall we get started introducing ourselves? I think, Ella, you should go first because this is your channel.
Because this is my hot mess. Yes, I am. Hi, everybody. My name is Ella York. Thank you again for joining my channel. We have an amazing lineup for you guys today about character development. I have written 3 women's fiction novels that are published, and I also have completed a fantasy novel that is in its edit querying process. So that is me.
All right, and who wants to go next?
I'll go
I vote
next.
Chey.
Sorry, what was that? Who? Me?
I said I vote Chey.
Oh, okay. So, well then, my name's Cheyanne Murray, and I'm the author of The Purest Blood. It is a self-published novel, and I'm currently working on one that is not related to that one. It's going to be a 3-book series.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'll go next. My name is Jacqueline Kirk. I've, in the past, self-published a children's science fiction series, and I'm in the process of writing a fantasy trilogy at the moment. So first draft process still.
Yeah.
I'm Ashton Gaskill.
Misha Gericke. Oh, go for it, Ashton. Go for it.
I'm Ashton Gaskill, the author of the 12 Dozen Kingdoms series. I'm still working on that. Plan is to self-publish it, get it going this year. That is a series of novellas that I'm quite excited about.
Do you know how many novellas?
In total, each era of the series is going to be 4 novellas, and there's going to be 8 eras overall. So,
Ooh, okay.
32 novellas.
Nice. Misha.
Okay, I'm Misha. I'm from South Africa. I have written 2 books so far in the War of Six Crowns series and 1 in the Endless trilogy. The War of Six Crowns is epic young adult and Endless is urban fantasy. So yeah, I'm currently busy with writing the 3rd book, The War of Six Crowns.
Awesome.
All right, and I am Dianna Gunn. I am the author of the fantasy novella Keeper of the Dawn and the coming book Moonshadow's Guardian, which I'm about to make some really exciting announcements about over on my channel, so you should definitely go check that out after this.
Nice.
And let's just dive right into our chat about character development. So the first question is, do you believe that it is important to start your character development before you start writing, or is that something that comes to you through the book?
I think a certain amount of it comes before you start writing. You have to have an idea of what you want your character to be, what kind of things you want them to accomplish, what skills they need to possess. And then as you write the story, just like as you go through life, different things are going to happen that will influence your character, and then you adjust them accordingly. But you have to have a blueprint.
Yeah, I agree with that. You kind of start off with a general idea of how they're going to develop And then as the story and the plot progresses, you're always open to change anyway when your story keeps going.
Right.
But yeah, you just have to start off with an idea and then just work with it as you go.
Kind of how I view.
Sorry, I was going to say, as long as it's within your character, not something really offbeat that they would never do, then you're like, then your readers are just going to go, nah.
Kind of how I view writing stories, since I am, I think, the heaviest outliner.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a bit more on the opposite side. I'm basically
So I think I can get started on that a little bit slower than most people.
I think he froze a little bit. Something happened.
Yeah, Misha, we didn't hear anything you said, girl. Try it again.
Okay, so I go. Can you guys hear me now? Let's just start there. If I have to read the whole thing, I'm like, yeah. So I basically go in the opposite direction now, with a concept, and then I actually approach my characters as if they're living people that I have to go get to know, and I actually get to know them as I'm writing the draft.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to have characters that show up in my dreams, so I tend to know them really well before I start writing about them, but that's just me. And let me take a look at our questions. So what part of a character is usually the first thing you think of? Or like character in relation to your story, or your in relation to your character?
Didn't really hear that properly. There was some kind of interference.
Hello?
Hi.
Hello?
Can you hear me normally now? Is that just a freak accident?
Hopefully. Go ahead and do it again.
Oh, technology is not on our side today.
Mm-mm.
Maybe we should have been sci-fi writers instead. Maybe then it would like So my question was, what part of a character usually comes to you first, and like, how do they first appear in your head?
Oh, it's like you said, I usually see my character first. Like, I envision what they look like, and then from there I just kind of build their story. And sometimes if I'm struggling with what they look like I have an idea, I'll go online and I'll look up pictures of people and I'll just type in like the descriptors that I have for my character, and then once I see them, I'm like, that's them, and the rest of it just kind of flows. So that's me. I'm a visual person. I have to see them.
I'm sort of a visual person too. Oh, sorry. Are you gonna go?
Go ahead.
We're all terribly polite here.
Yeah, I'm sort of a visual person too. Only instead of coming up with images when I get an idea in my head, I draw. So, and then as I draw, I kind of get to know the character a little bit better as I draw them.
Awesome. And your drawings are really good. I've always loved seeing those on Twitter.
Thank you.
They are.
Thank you.
I'm not visual at all, personally. Oftentimes I'll get to the end of my book and realize I don't even know what my characters look like. I'll have to go back and add in visual references throughout. I figure out their personalities really early. I just kind of figure out who they are, like, internally as a person, what drives them, that kind of thing. And that gives me a really good idea of like how they act and what they need as far as the plot goes. But unless there's some aspect of their characterization that's important for the plot, I oftentimes overlook that until my second or third draft.
For me, I sometimes start with sometimes you come up with the character first, and then sometimes you think, well, what character would go in that first? But I'm a bit like Ashton, kind of personality and things like that happen first, and then you think, well, what are they going to look like for this particular story? So then you just take it from there, really.
And Misha?
I'm a little bit of both. I basically, okay, first, I kind of get my characterization also a lot from dreams and from concepts. I'll like sit somewhere reading a book and then a character would walk into my head. So it would literally look like a person to me in my brain. And then I would start basically doing interviews, character interviews with my characters in order to get to know them. And that's basically how I do it. So please tell me you guys heard it.
I actually hate interviews. And I tend to start with a visual of my characters pretty firmly in my head, not because so much I'm a visual person, but because, like I said, I tend to dream a lot of my fiction stuff and a lot of my characters. And so they just sort of, they appear to me and there may or may not be words attached. So then it's sort of figuring out what my subconscious is trying to tell me by giving me this face in my dreams, basically. But it does start very visual for me and then slowly progresses into the personality. And I tend to start trauma first when I do the personality. I'm like, what made this person messed up?
Let's start.
Yeah, it's so funny. This is completely random, but I love how different, like we're on completely different ends of the spectrum with almost everything.
Yeah.
Some are just like hardcore to the left, some are hardcore to the right, but I think it's what it's going to give, you know, people that are listening to us a huge plethora of different things that they can do. That's awesome.
And I think that's one of the greatest things about being a writer too, is that there's something different. Everyone has a different process, and you know, your process might be almost identical to someone else's, but there's still always a difference, and sometimes that's a lot bigger, and like there's no wrong way. None of us are doing it wrong, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why I never liked math, because with math, you're either doing it right or doing it wrong, and that just doesn't sit well with me.
I, on the other hand, love math, so.
Oh, why does that not surprise me?
Yeah.
I did math in my university degree, so.
Yeah, I was an engineering degree, so.
Nice.
Lots of spreadsheets.
Another good tip if you're wanting to visualize your characters using Pinterest. Go in there, just look up, you know, blonde female, whatever, and then just going through millions of pictures
until you see her.
That never works for me. I can sort of do that with DeviantArt a bit, but my books are so fantasy that anything in like a real world context just throws me right out of it. I can't look at a person from our era and be like, you could somehow be my character, because it's just so alien to my world.
For me, for Pinterest, it's like grabbing little bits and pieces of the character. So it'll be like this fabric that matches this part of her clothing and stuff like that. And then when you put it all on board, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Fair enough. Maybe I'll get the hang of it someday, but I won't. And you know what else I don't think I will ever get the hang of, and this is why I actually put the question on the list, is naming characters. So tell me, guys, what is your wisdom? How do you name your characters?
I have a magical spreadsheet, surprisingly enough. So I set up a thing where I choose like 2 different real world cultures. I get like 10, 15 female names and male names, and I break them up into their syllables. And I put them into this spreadsheet, and it shuffles them all together. The first time I did it, I made 3 million names.
Holy crap!
A lot of them weren't useful, obviously, but you can go in there. I feel like, okay, I want an M name, so I'll go down to M, and I'll be like, all right, here's thousands of names of different like blended together syllables, and like if I want a specific to make different areas of my world feel different, I'll like take out certain vowels so that you have a consistent vowel usage in different areas to make it feel more coherent, even though you're shuffling together like A really popular one I like to do is Japanese and Latin.
Oh.
Ooh,
So that
I
makes
like
up some. That's if you if I ever publish my books. Whenever I get around to doing that, you'll see a lot of that. But there's different regions have different cultures that I've blended together, so that gives it kind of a coherent feel, even though it's all made up.
I don't do anything that by the book. Mine's like almost a glorified keyboard smash. I start with one letter and then I just keep adding sounds that I like the sound of until I'm like, hey, this is a name.
That's great. Like Mad Lib.
Yeah, pretty much. Unless it's like based in our world and then I use actual names.
Yeah, I actually have a list that I keep, and if I'm somewhere and I hear a name that I like or some random word pops in my head and I'm like, ooh, that works as a name, so I'll just go like type it in there. So my list is like 60 names long, and then I'll go to my list and pick like a first and last name from there. But in this book in particular, one of the characters is Native American, so I went to Native American name website and looked at the different names and tried to pick names that might make sense. So it really just depends on the culture of the character.
Baby name websites are great.
Yeah, but then you start getting ads for maternity stuff. You all in there.
That is true.
So I actually have quite a good book. It's a Celtic baby names. You know, they say, oh, you should get baby names. Well, these are actually Celtic ones. So if ever I'm doing sort of a Celtic setting, it comes in really handy. Or you can just look through it. And then, right, if I change that letter to this one and then just kind of do that. Yeah. So
Sure.
I used to just make them up off the top of my head. And but lately I've been, if you've got like a sort of Middle Eastern, what you would equate to a Middle Eastern setting, looking up their names and then just doing the same thing, change a letter here or there, just kind of do that. So yeah, there's lots of different ways you can do it. But I don't know if you guys do this. Someone said if you can't think of a name straight away, you put in a sort of temporary name. I try not to do that. Well, I try not to do it because I find I then can't think of an actual name for them because I've been using this one for so long. It's just you're like, it's a shit name and I can't change it now.
When I do that, I try to use something that's definitely not a name. So I'll just put like no spaces or anything, but just put like, senior officer number 1. That way I can replace really easily because I'm never going to write senior officer number 1 in a different context.
I've even done insert name here during desperate.
You know what? If you get all the way through your book and you hate the name, just go Control F, type in that name, and you can go in and change it through the whole document. It's time consuming, but it works.
Make sure you put a space after the name so that if you're using like a short name, you don't end up messing up all the words that have those same letters in them. Like I had a character whose name was Lardy, and I changed her name, and then all of a sudden, all of the times when somebody was glaring at someone, it just looked really weird. So make sure you put a space after the names when you're doing the find and replace. That is a pro tip.
I've definitely been there.
For me, I basically also use. It's actually difficult to say. Some characters I actually walk into my head with their names attached, and then other ones I have to go looking for their names, like in a baby name book. So then what I would do is I page through it until one stands out, and then I'll go, okay, I'll actually think this works great, and that's like what I would do. What was that?
Sorry about that. If you heard that, there's random.
Like what?
Does someone have a ghost in their house? Like
the one Sunday my fiance isn't actually.
Do we need to send help?
Back to character names. I have sort of built a system, and what I try to do is I try to give like each different culture its own sort of naming rules, and this works with varying amounts of success. If I'm doing a big novel with a big cast, it tends to get messy, but if it's a smaller story with just a few characters, I can get away with it really easily. And so in Keeper of the Dawn, which is my first book, but it's a novella, the naming system is that basically each time they age through a generation, they gain a new syllable to their name. And so like the first time it happens is like when they officially become an adult. So they're like one syllable as kids and then two. And that turned out to be really awkwardly limiting in a couple places, because I was like, okay, so not only do I have to give you like a name that like sounds decent as one syllable, but it also has to like, you have to be able to attach another syllable to it without making it unpronounceable, basically. Yeah, I find that sort of helps and sort of hinders at the same time. So I don't know if that's what I'm going to keep doing, but that's what I've been trying to do, is having naming rules for my different cultures.
That's cool.
All right, and how do you keep track of all of these things that you are learning about your characters before your novel? Do you have character profiles? Do you have binders for them? What do you do?
I have a bit of paper in a binder. That's what I use. I just write down everything and then it's into the binder for that particular novel. That's how I do it. I don't use specific profiles. Although I've just been reading, it's a writing book by Deborah Chester, whose writing I really enjoy. And she's got a great big long list of the questions you can ask, just as your story progresses, not all at once, because there's about 75. And they're quite interesting. You know, it's just how has magic affected this person in the past, and then later on it's how is it affecting the person now, that sort of thing. But to start off with, they're just, you know, a little bit and then just carry on from there. And it does get bulky by the end of it, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar. The first draft is always just kind of like a bunch of notes that I find out about the character as I go along. And then come the second draft, I try to make it somewhat more formal. So that way when I'm editing, I can just quickly look to see the information. It's not just this entire lengthy thing of notes. So I guess the profiles are used for after.
Yeah. I would kind of tend to agree with that. I'm trying to shift to using them more beforehand. I'm hoping that it'll make the actual drafting process a little shorter for me, but I've tended to do things the same way.
I have some questions that I ask beforehand, and that's a lot, like I was saying before, the personality stuff, just kind of who they are, to help guide me. And then as I go through, like if I do, you know, commit to a hair color or eye color or whatever, I try to jot that down. I usually have a Google Doc with all the characters for that book. I just, as it comes up, I can switch tabs, go there real fast, add it, pop back really quick, just so I have it for later.
That's exactly what I do. I think this is the first time we actually did the same thing, Ashton. I actually have a document that I work with side by side with my Word document, and as things come up, or, you know, like you said, I decide on an eye color, or I mention what hospital they work at, or I, you know, create another character that's in their past, then I jot that down for consistency, because I tend to write in series. So when you're writing a series, it's even more difficult to try to remember all these little tiny details, because I remember between my first and my second book, I changed the name of the hospital that the girl was at. And I caught it at the end, but it was like in that moment, I'm like, oh gosh, I need to make sure I write this down, because just because I think I remember what it is doesn't make it so. So I write those down as they come up, stuff that might show up later in the story.
I actually don't really use it. I have like a thing, if they have like this standard template that you can fill in all that kind of information. But usually what I do is I have, like I mentioned, I interview my characters in the beginning, and I usually lose those interviews somewhere. I write it down by hand, and then I put them down, and I kind of just never find them again. But otherwise, I actually just, like I said, I actually mostly get to know my characters as I go through the story. So when I'm writing my series, part of my edits literally are for me to read through the previous books in the series to make sure that everything is consistent all the way through. But it also then helps me because it helps with things like character voice consistency and things as well, because then you can tell if there are changes between the books, which is kind of important later on. So
I find a lot of the official published character sheets are just a lot of unnecessary details that take a long time to fill out, and I ended up not benefiting from that time spent at all.
Oh, exactly, yeah, because you don't really, like, you might be like, oh yes, this character is going to wear these clothes, and then the character is actually a jerk to you, and then changes while you're writing, because it's like, no, this doesn't fit.
Now she can't wear pink, she has to wear black.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This is why I just give all my main characters uniforms, and then they just have to deal with it.
That's
Like, you are forced to wear this by your order or your military organization, whatever. The people you work for, you don't get a choice.
Kind of on that note, tangentially related, I suppose. I tried to I didn't this last time, but something that I'm going to try to do in the future is keep in mind outfits and looks for characters that are kind of iconic, so that, like, if you see someone at a con cosplaying your character, you would be able to identify them, like including details like that, so that people can easily say, "Oh, hey, that's that's the character from this book that I like." I feel like that gives you a lot of ability to kind of stick around in your readers' minds better. I had that realization when I was rereading Mistborn, because there's a lot of characters in the original Mistborn trilogy that just their look, you could be like, oh, that is that person. Whereas in the sequel trilogy, it's not as much.
Yeah, for sure. And then that can actually work for marketing in some ways, because people are like, well, I so want to draw this character. And fan art is great.
yeah.
It's okay, I've got a dragon. Everyone will just draw the dragon.
Everyone knows.
Dragons always win.
Two dragons.
The fantasy staple.
All right, so once you actually start writing the story, how important is it for you that your character grows and changes throughout the course of the story? Is that something you really focus on, or is that something that you just sort of let happen?
I think the biggest thing is that you just let it happen, but it has to be organic. Like, you can't have your character be one way all of the story, and then all of a sudden, like, they do a complete 180 with no explanation as to why your character has changed so drastically. So I like to let them grow and change, but as long as it's within the realm of reality.
Yeah, I also love like the whole characters changing from who they are at the start of the story. I love that. It's like the hero's journey kind of thing, where they're like this weak character before and don't really have much self-confidence, and then they're this amazing character by the end that like has more self-confidence. I love that. So it's definitely important to me.
Yeah,
Or-
it's definitely.
Yeah, or maybe a character going insane by the end. You never know.
You really hate your character, Chey. Why?
Maybe they hate me.
It's a circle of hate, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
My whole outlining system is actually
Oh, it freezes.
focuses on that character change.
It's not working right now.
Ella's gone for a second.
I think she's talking to somebody.
Did you turn off the camera and turn off the mic? Okay, so my whole outlining system revolves around the character change and how they change throughout the book. So I do start with, doesn't necessarily have to be a positive change, like Chey was saying, but I try to find, revolving around the theme of the book, that's kind of where the theme comes from in my experience, my opinion, is what main change the main character is going through. And if you have multiple characters, multiple stories in your book, I feel like each story is kind of the process of one change or another. Kind of how I view stories in general.
Yeah, sorry, my mom was telling me that the video froze, but it came back. So we're all good. She was watching it the other room. She's like, it froze. It's not working. Yeah, I'm sure you heard all that. I forgot to turn off.
All right. Misha, what about your characters? Do you try to push them to change, or?
Well, for me, it's literally they just have to change. It just my stories follow kind of thing where they have to learn things and adapt to a situation. So, the one character actually has a lot of like reversions to his where he used to be, because it's always easier for him to fall back to that default because it was defensive. So for him to grow out of that isn't as easy. So he, in the first two books, the first book he was just this like angry person, and in the second book he realizes that actually he's been treating people around him really badly. And then in the third book he's trying to treat them better, but now he just kind of becomes more aware of every time he doesn't really treat them the way he should be treating them. So it kind of it's for me it's a natural thing. So some characters grow faster than others, and that's kind of, sometimes I get frustrated, so I hope my readers don't get frustrated. But it wouldn't have been right if he suddenly became this 100% heroic Superman kind of guy. He has his insecurities for very good reasons, and that can't just vanish. So, but luckily, after this book, there should be 3 more. He has a long time, so yeah.
And if you think about it just in general, like in life, we progress, right? We change so much from our 20s to our 30s. And as we go through life experiences, we change and adjust so much. So it's only natural that your characters grow too, whether that's they turn into worse people based on what's happened to them, or they, like you said, Chey, they grow into these stronger, more powerful characters as they go through and realize like what they're capable of. So, I mean, it's just like a natural progression. I think it's something that has to happen.
And I think especially in fantasy novels, because you usually have, well, most fantasy have big events that happen, and if your characters got these, you know, life-changing things happening to them, and then they don't actually change, it's not very interesting, really.
Yeah, you feel cheated almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I usually, when I'm starting a story, I have at least like an idea of where I want that change to end, and I'll let the character mostly figure out how they get there and like what their turning points are. But I always know like what the end goal for that character is, who I want them to be at the beginning versus when the story ends.
Yeah, I started with the ending as well before I hit the beginning, but I kind of tend to look at those turning points beforehand and then design my character around them. So instead of saying, okay, I have this character, how are they going to get here? I say, okay, I need, what kind of person would make this 3 decisions in a row? Like, what kind of person background leads to doing that?
I like that. That's a great way to get that out. I feel like you do a lot more outlining than I do, though. I have this feeling that your outline is probably like 3 times the length of mine.
I kind of go in the opposite direction, but I'm a pantser, like when I'm rough draft. But for me, when I do, for example, if I do have the characters first, then what I do is actually say, but okay, that is what they are like, what would create an interesting situation for them to be in, something that challenges them. Or otherwise, if I have a concept for the plot story, would think about what kind of characters would create the most conflict within that plot in order to keep the plot turning. So that's kind of the same, but in a different kind of approach to get there.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I like it. All right. And so how do you actually make that change happen? What does that actually look like in your writing?
very gradual.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it like the change for my characters definitely starts off very, very small. Like you start seeing something happen in their personality, and then maybe they make a big decision that kind of speeds up that process, but it's definitely very gradual. Unless, yeah, drastic changes to their character. Something dramatic. I don't know.
I try to introduce them to other ideas. So I don't just have them change randomly. Like I'll introduce them to another character who has a personal philosophy along the lines of what I want them to be working towards. So my characters kind of seep off of these other philosophies as they go, slowly working their way towards the end goal. So it doesn't just feel like it's coming out of nowhere. It's coming from, their interactions and their experiences as a person.
Yeah, I think the only time you can get away with like a sudden change if it's like something very, very, very traumatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to be careful with how many times you do that in a single story. That's something I struggle with. I really like traumatizing people.
I'm gonna ruin your life over and over.
Yeah, sometimes I gotta be careful, and I gotta like add some like breathing room between decimating people's lives.
I'm glad I'm not one of your characters.
So am I.
Chey, I take it back. You're not that mean to your characters. Yeah, I like everything you said. The subtle, when it's a normal life progression, most people, unless they know you or know the character intimately, would barely recognize it. But if it's something traumatic that causes them to be thrust into a different piece of who they are, then that makes sense. But not too much in the same story. You want to kill your character.
Yeah, I think it has to be a sort of more a natural progression for the character. And I was just thought there that maybe it would depend on the age of the character as well. If they're young, if they would change a bit quicker, maybe. I don't know. I never really thought of that. I just thought that there. I have to think about that later.
True.
And somebody who I could say that since I'm the oldest one here, we can get a bit set in our ways. And if sometimes you're like, so yeah, so there's a lot of factors to kind of take in, but if it's natural, not all of a sudden, unless, like I say, a deeply traumatic experience, then it should be good.
One thing I really like to do is have my character be told things. I tend to write very headstrong ladies, and so they need to have things repeated to them a few times before they actually internalize the message sometimes. Misha, you looked like you were...
No, it's okay. I think there might be a few second delays on my speaking or something, and I interrupted people accidentally. Sorry. No, for me, I don't know how to explain it. It's for me because of the fact that I rough draft by hand and I rough draft without a plan. All this kind of just happens automatically and very organically. And for me, it always feels like character changes come from the choices they make, the reactions they have to situations they have. Like I mentioned now, my angry character is James, who's just like, he started off very insecure and angry, and now he's making a decision not to do that, but it's not really working for him as he wanted it to. Or one of my other characters was someone who always wanted to hide, but the situation of her birth basically makes that now everyone expects of her to stand up and be counted and be this person that everybody has to back behind. And she's like a lot of times she has like a kind of reaction because to try and conceptualize this whole be responsible for millions of people when you really just wanted to, you dress to hide in the background, you act around, you try to not make eye contact so that people don't see you. And everybody's looking at her the whole time. And so it's kind of that kind of thing where she literally has to learn how this in order to to serve her function, if I can say it that way, to achieve her goal, she has to change who she is. But it isn't necessarily that I don't add like what people call sometimes beats into my books. So I don't have, okay, so this is where she learns this is where she does that, this is where she does this. I literally just throw my characters into scenes, and then when they react and how they learn and what they learn from those scenes, and then as the book progresses, they just keep learning. And then by the end of the book, when you actually just look at where she was in the beginning or where he was in the beginning, it just is so different. But it was without me really intervening, because I literally let my characters just come to life. So they make their own choices and things, and I just kind of have to deal with it for better or worse. But oddly enough, where the thing is actually funnily enough, it always does end up where I aimed for. But it's just how it gets there is never the way I expected it to be, because my characters never act the way I expected them to act. So, yeah.
Yeah, characters run away with the story a lot. I've definitely found that to be my experience too, but when that happens and I get really frustrated with them, I just tell myself it's okay. This just means that you've created real people, and it's fine, except for when they get themselves killed, because then I have to do a lot of replanning.
I hate when that happens.
Oh, Dianna.
What I have to do is, if my characters make a decision that I did not want them to make, then I have to go change the scene. I have to go back and rewrite the scene so that the circumstances are different, so that they make a decision that's more than they wanted to do. Otherwise, they will not change their mind, and it's horrible.
Yeah, that's one thing that doesn't happen. My characters get themselves killed unless it was planned. They can operate within a certain
once, and it was my favorite character.
Oh no!
I was literally crying, and I'm like, I know that this scene makes sense. This scene works, and this actually has to happen for things that have to happen in the next book. And I realized that it was essential, as it was happening, but it was still my favorite character, and I am still heartbroken.
Yeah, I'm the type of person that would find a way to rewrite them back in the story. I'd be the soap opera writer, surprise, they didn't actually die. That was the evil twin.
I kind of think that's cheating. That's sort of how I look at it.
Totally
I'm very much in the George R. R. Martin camp.
I would cheat. It's my story. I can do what I want. That was their evil twin. That wasn't them. This is why they're back.
Well, I think for me, it's very specifically rooted in, I was a huge Harry Potter kid, right? And there was the whole thing in the mythos of Harry Potter that Harry Potter and Voldemort were supposed to die together, and that was this whole thing that didn't happen. And I felt cheated by J.K. Rowling, and so now I'm like, no, if somebody's gonna die, they're gonna die, and that's just how it is.
But see, she killed off some really, really awesome people. And I'm gonna tell you, there was one book, and I feel so strongly about it. There was one book, and it was Allegiant in the Divergent series. I don't know if you guys have read that. But by the end of it, I was like, I am done. I will never read anything else she wrote, because I was so upset that she killed the main. Well, let me not spoiler alert. And what she did, that I was just like, I will never read anything else she writes. But that's the risk you run with killing the main character. I mean, she technically killed Harry. He came back.
Yeah, I think we'll have to do a whole.
Just that was
such a broad topic.
We're not here to argue about Harry Potter. we can have another panel for that, okay, guys?
Well, we might have to do a video on deaths.
Yes.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah.
I'm all about that.
All about it. But we sort of touched on this before, and I'm really curious to find out more. How much do your characters grow between the first draft and the second draft? And how much more intentional do you become with those beats of the character journey, the character growth, as you're rewriting?
I don't usually change it very much between the first and second draft. When I wrote it the first time, it was very organic. So what I try to do when I go back for the second draft is just clean it up. And if there's something that I missed in the explanation, I try to explain it so that it makes more sense for the reader. But aside from what happened in the original journey, I don't go back and change something in their growth pattern.
Sometimes I'll add a little bit more foreshadowing just to make it seem a little bit more gradual when I go back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do that a lot.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. Just it's a natural progression in the first one, and if I need to add something in the second, it's probably more deliberate. But hopefully, it's done in the first draft if I've done it right.
Ashton?
I obviously, as we've established, outline myself pretty heavily. So my main arc is usually pretty well off, I have found. But as I go through the drafts, I'll oftentimes realize that the side character needs an arc, or the specific relationship needs an arc, or that there's other aspects that need arcs. So then I'll go back in and look at those. That's actually what I'm about to start working on this week. And what I do with that is I sit back and I say, all right, here's kind of what I have to work with. These are the parameters of the story. How can I get a satisfactory experience, satisfactory, natural feeling character arc from point A to point B of whatever arc I'm looking at? And I'll outline the beats of that relationship or whatever it is, and then weave those into what I had before. So the main arc, the main storyline doesn't really change a lot. A lot of the side stuff I'm finding does.
That's fair. Misha?
Long story. I rough draft by hand, so then I have to rewrite to a computer. When I have written my rough draft, I basically take the points that, and then I basically create an outline, and then I scratch to hit those points. But basically, those are plot points. It's not a lot character arc things. So then I just leave the character arcs to just do their own thing again. And then, because I also know then from the rough draft what makes the characters make certain decisions. So I just repeat that. And then basically after my rewrites, I basically spend on amplifying my themes or those character moments to make sure that the emotions are coming through to the reader in the same way as that I feel them when I wrote them. Because sometimes there's that disconnect. You kind of feel things because you know the characters and so you as a writer, but then when you let someone else read it, it's not going to be the same for them. So then I have to I push more emotion into my scenes a bit to bring that across to the reader. And that's basically all I do.
Sure.
Awesome. And hey guys, before we move on, we have a question. The person that wrote it wants to hear us talk about writing non-human characters, everything's from elves to dragons to sentient clouds of smoke, etc. How do you go about developing those characters? So if you have any of those in your stories, please feel free to share that now.
Ooh, I'll start.
Dragons, me.
I know I was talking about dragons, and actually my dragon character in Moonshadow's Guardian, which is the book that I'm going to be officially announcing release date stuff for next week, is actually sort of an experimental dragon created by the god of mischief. And so he's an Eastern style dragon. He's a worm, but he's also very, very furry, kind of like the dragon from the Neverending Story or possibly from Spirited Away. And he has telepathic abilities and basically the personality of an overgrown puppy. So he's big and intimidating, and he has teeth the size of the average human, but he's really, really sweet. And I just had so much fun writing him. He's definitely one of the greatest characters that I've ever written, or at least I think so, just because he's so fun and it's so nice to twist the dragon trope and like make him actually just like this big, sweet, friendly creature.
Yeah, I kind of do something simple or similar with fantasy creatures. Like if it's gonna be like say a griffin, it's kind of fun to like base it off maybe a cat personality a little bit or something else. So yeah, definitely add a little bit of inspiration from animals into the personalities.
Well, for me, I do have a shapeshifter in mind, and then I have mutants. So they, their powers kind of change as they go too. But the biggest thing for me, I need to see it. So when I'm trying to create it, I have to have an image of what I want this creature to look like, whether I draw it terribly myself or I find it online. And then I stare at it until it starts to come to me about what the character's personality is and how, you know, what causes him to shift. So it's a lot of different things for me, but I have to see it. Surprise.
I think the big key to, or I guess kind of two keys to writing good non-human characters is to have a good cultural background for the whatever race it is. You want it to make sense. You want it to be something unique. Just all the good stuff. Figure out what kind of, you know, religious background that would have, what kind of what sociological, what their government system is, all that kind of thing, and figure out what the kind of stereotypical look at the race would be. But then also realize the other side of it is that no culture or race or anything is monolithic. So you want to figure out what makes this individual person unique within that overall kind of feel. So you can look at things, specific things like, you know, what kind of alcohol do they prefer, or what's their favorite, you know, look at the very specific things as well as kind of where they fit within their culture as a whole.
Yeah, and if their main character, something that's really interesting is to use that to influence how they actually write about their world. Like one thing that's really interesting about Anne Rice's Vampire Lestat books is, yeah, they have all this purple flowery prose that is kind of obnoxious, but it actually makes sense because Lestat is a vampiric character who sees way more than the average human. So him describing so much in so much detail actively makes sense. And you can do something similar with your non-human characters and like give them really distinctive narrative traits that show that they aren't human regularly, like really root you in what they are instead.
And, you know, one of the things that I recently read, I was reading reviews for a sci-fi book that was recently released, and a lot of the feedback, a lot of the negative feedback was that they didn't explain why this character needed certain things. So let's say the character had webbed feet. Why do they have webbed feet? Are they just, you know, mirroring a duck? Or, you know, do they is it an aquatic planet that they come from? Like, why do they need this thing that you're trying to put out there and trying to make it make sense for the reader? Because they don't know what's in your head. They don't know why you gave it to them. Does it make sense that the character is blue? Did the sun rays on their planet, if they don't have blue skin, they would die? Like, what is it? Why do they need to be the way that you made them? Not just because you just wanted to do something for fun.
Yes.
I mean, in a fantasy world, you can get away with the gods made them that way if you're doing like high magic and you have gods that literally created the species. But otherwise, evolution works in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like having a super, super furry Yeti in the desert might not work out well.
Maybe not.
No, for me, it depends also from book to book for my stuff. For my fantasy series, War of Six Crowns, a lot of what I did was doing not the same thing for my fantasy that everybody else is doing. So my dragons are just other dragons, and my elves are definitely not like other elves. They like the elves, but then as you actually get to know them, you know, like they're all out kind of thing. But it's actually more a situation where, but within that culture, I kind of did explore a little bit with the elves, for example, what made them the way they are. And then there are within that culture, there are still elves that aren't the same because they didn't believe in the way that the created, if I put it that way. So you kind of, like what Ashton said, is that no culture that you create can be monolithic. There has to be, within that, there has to be variation, and there has to be depth to what you do with everything. And sometimes that can be quite complicated because there are multiple countries and multiple cultures within those countries. Then it starts becoming rather complicated to keep track of everything, because it becomes like, it's to put it that way. But for me, with my dragon, for example, she just, when they meet the other dragon now, he's not to be trusted, and then it's kind of like this whole thing with my human main dragon is with saying, but he trusts this other dragon, and then they kind of have this whole thing about it. But in the end, it's to, for example, with, okay, I have to also say my dragon characters, for example, they're not point of view characters. So I think I kind of take a different approach. And my approach to them, because it has to do with how my human characters, who are the point of view characters, see them. So, for example, she react when she not, what does she do, and Leon laughing, being she is essentially, so all those kinds of things, you kind of, she's that sized dragon, so how does she act that makes her dragon instead of cat-like, if I can put it that way. So it's all that's fine, but it's not really, but other than that, I actually just approach all of my characters, whether they're human or not human, the same way, in the sense that they have certain motivations, have certain things that stop them from getting what they want, and they are willing to do certain things to achieve it, despite those things stopping what they want. And if I know those things, it really matter what race they are. It just, they still act in a certain predictable way, but it just have different parameters, for example, to what a human being would have.
Yeah, like they're still a person. It just so happens that they are not a human person. And so the overall character arc design is very similar. It's just you want to make sure that they're different enough to establish that they aren't human, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I have a dragon in my book as well. And the fun thing with it is, because it's not human, it doesn't have the same reactions to things like, when they come across one of their dead friends and they're going to bury it and the dragon thinks it's a waste of meat, that sort of thing. You can do that. So you can have fun with it that sort of way. But I do the same. It kind of starts off with the elves, kind of the human-like races. Start with a sort of human base, but then it's a cultural thing. Why would we, especially if they're long-lived, if they've been alive for a long time, they're going to have a different viewpoint on everything. So yeah, some, and like I say, some of the fantasy creatures you can have fun with.
Well, yeah, there's like a Dragon Age game that I played, and in the
Which one?
I think it was the first one where they were talking about the dwarfs being scared of going outside because they thought they'd fall into the sky because there was nothing above them.
That is Origins.
And I was like, that is a great idea, because they never go outside, so they wouldn't know if they would just fly away. Like, little quirks like that, because they live underground is great.
So good. All right. Well, I do feel like we could continue talking just about non-human characters for like another hour easily, but it is 1:10. I know we started a few minutes late, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we should probably wrap things up. Is there anything really important that you guys want to touch on before we go?
I guess we can go ahead and say that we established we're going to be doing these chats the second Sunday of every month.
Yes.
I think that's still the plan. So anybody who's watching, if you want to just kind of note that for future.
And while we're at it, does anyone want to host it next?
I might.
We can probably figure that out in a...
I have to check what the date of the second Sunday next month is, maybe.
But
Okay.
I have a question. I do have a question that I want to put out there really quick. So can everybody tell where you're from? Because I don't think we've ever done that.
Oh.
Oh.
Oh, when I started.
I'm from Missouri, so I'm hanging out here in the middle of the U.S.
Diana?
I'm from Canada, and yes, it is the real place.
It's not just a big sheet of
Island, we
ice.
do not live in igloos. Well, most of us don't.
I'm from
And I'm from
Canada,
the
and I. Oh,
So I'm from the southwest of Scotland. There's a small town here, and it's nighttime here. It's nice and dark outside.
Chey, where are you from?
I'm from Alberta, Canada, and I also do not live in an igloo.
Misha, I know you said earlier, but
I live near Cape Town in South Africa, and I do not ride elephants to school. And I don't own a pet dog.
I am actually
Excellent.
born and raised in Wisconsin, so I know all about those igloos y'all living up there. But I right now live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I wouldn't change the heat for the world. So
It's snowing outside. I wish I was.
It was snowing
I
here
would say
yesterday.
that I feel bad for you, but I don't.
Hey, you already said you live in Canada. We know it's snowing.
Yeah,
Hey,
it's
I
snowing
like-
and it's cold
I like
from
when
like
it snows. It's
October
like a real
to
Canadian.
probably March. Well, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate everyone tuning into my channel and meeting with us today. We really, really appreciate having you here. So if you are interested in finding out more about the authors that are in this video, please feel free to go down into the description section down below, and you can find access to their social media. And on their social media, you can figure out where you can purchase their books. For those of us that have them and for those of us that are doing them, make sure you follow and subscribe to their YouTube channels, which is also down below, so you know when they're posting new videos. Make sure you go to Diana's channel next week to find out when she's posting her new book. We look forward to seeing you guys on the second Sunday of March. Eastern. You guys figure out what that is in your time zone, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.